Good morning also from my side. And I'm particularly pleased to introduce the third session of this conference. And this session, as you already mentioned, will be presented by Kesh Sharma and Robert Vanallo. I myself was able to gain some insight into the practice of warm data lab last December. And I was so excited about that I immediately called Nora Bateson and asked her, because I'm part of the preparation team of this conference, if we could use this practice for the international virtual conference. And she said, yes, there is also a version you can do it not only in person, but you can also do it virtually. And she handed me over to Vivian Leung. And then we tried to find out how we can make this possible. And Vivian then found Robert and Kesh, who have time today and can really bring this practice closer to us. I'm an organizational consultant, and for me, the Warm Data Lab is a possibility to bring back organizations to the original purpose, to the purpose to serve society, to help people, and also to do that in the way our planet embedded into the ecology of the planet. And so this is my view on it, but I think we can explore much more out of the coming session. And I think it's just time now. Let's dive into the practice of the Warm Data Lab. And I hand over to the both, to Kesh and Robert, and they will introduce themselves. And I'm looking forward to an inspiring session of this day.
Thanks, Liselotte. Ike, everyone for inviting us to come along. I'm going to kick us off today. But first, I'd just love to say Ram Ram, Namaste, Vanakkam, Bulla, Wamanjeka. How's it going? That's some greetings from some of the tales that make me up. And I'm going to have the pleasure of trying to introduce this concept of warm data to all of you. The term warm data was coined by Nora Bateson around 2012. And for those that don't know, Nora is the president of the International Basin Institute and the creator of warm data. But when Nora was creating this term, he wasn't actually talking about data. She was actually talking about what data missed. So she was sitting in a conference in the audience, and a group of researchers were talking about a project that they were doing. And they had this screen put up, and across that screen were these dots that were moving. Every so often you would see this dot go past. And the group was really proud because they were explaining that each one of those dots was a Syrian refugee crossing the border in real time. And this is about the time where Nora jumped up and screams, but what about the warm data? And what she was looking at was what was missing in that data point, in that dot moving across that screen, was that this is a mother, a father, a son, a lawyer, a friend, that each one of those dots was a person embedded within layers of context and interrelationships in a living ecosystem. So really the term warm data was about naming and describing what was missed in our usual ways of thinking about data. And what does it mean to shift perception? To pay attention to the interrelationships that integrate a complex living system. So I want to show you two images here. In the first, we have this painting of a woman. And in the second, someone has meticulously pulled apart each brushstroke and rearranged them by color. Okay? All the black strokes, all the red strokes, all the yellow, etc. And in a way, this is a metaphor for the cold data. This is the data that has been pulled out of context, out of its relationships. And this is generally how we think. We are defining, we are measuring, we are naming the parts, unconsciously following a reductionist paradigm that believes if you understand the parts, then you can understand the whole. Now, I want you to imagine that this is actually a young person at risk. And all of the black strokes are the parts of information that have to do with the context of education. So reports, grades, detentions, and the red ones are related to health, diagnoses by psychologists, counselors, doctors. And the yellow ones might be the context of law, the offenses that have been done, the policies and procedures that this young person is wrapped up in. And the next one might be their tech history. And the next one might be the data from their family. Now, when we look at this young person in this way, through these siloed contexts, who sees the girl? Who sees the woman? It's impossible to respond to the wholeness of a living system when the information has been split. And the problem there isn't that the spreadsheet isn't big enough, that if we got more data points, that somehow they'll add together. The problem is in how we as human beings combine what we're given. And there's a very different combining that occurs when we're given image 1 versus when we're given image 2. Yeah. And it's not like this reductionist thinking isn't useful, but it really depends on what questions you're trying to answer. And understanding the brushstrokes in this way doesn't tell you much about the relationships between them. In fact, when you look at the brushstrokes in this way, the relationships between them have become distorted, broken, muddied. It's only when they're shown in their whole complexity that it becomes clear how the interrelationships between the different contexts integrate that whole system. And we can see that this is a woman. So when we're talking about wicked problems require intersystemic change. When you're talking about a family, you can't just replace a part. You can't say, oh, this kid doesn't work, let's go get a new one. Yeah. In a living system, you can't fix things one context at a time. You need to meet all the contexts at once, trans-contextually. Alfred Korzymski once said, a map is not the territory. The parts are not the system. The name is not the thing named. The model is not the thing being modeled. The menu is not the food. You can read every recipe on how to make soup and still not understand the relationships that went into making this bowl of soup. Because just in this bowl of soup is every context. It is a combining of cultures that have long histories of agriculture and families that have been passing down recipes and economies that are creating the conditions for the produce, and its history and its ecology and its science and its art and its education and its health. You're not going to be able to make this soup without all of those contexts at once. This soup is trans-contextual. It is in the territory. The menu is an abstracted map about the soup. And I'm begging you, please don't eat the menu. When you take action before perception change, it produces errors because it shortcuts the necessary complexity. And I also want to mention that what we're talking about here is ancient knowing. And when we're talking about warm data, it's a translation, a language to serve as a reminder, a remembering of something that many ancient cultures have already known. That by paying attention to our natural human capacities for navigating complexity, we can sense into information that is integral in how we move in the world. Every single one of us navigates a whole bunch of complexity every single day. And it's about how we perceive. So I want to ask you right now, what's in the space between? If you look at the space between yourself and the screen that you're on right now, and I ask you this question, what's in the space between? What do you think of? One way to perceive it is that there's nothing here, right? Between me and this screen, it's empty. Or perhaps you'll look down and you'll name the things on your desk, right? There's a keyboard, there's a mouse, there's my cup of tea. Some of you might get creative and you'll say that there's air, and you'll get even more clever and say that the air is made of molecules and the molecules are made of atoms. But if you notice as you go through these levels of abstraction, the space between the keyboard and the mouse, the space between the molecules, the space between the atoms, are generally seen as empty. Another way to see the space between is to see that it's full. There's a beautiful concept that I was introduced to that comes out of indigenous Polynesia, and it's called va. There's no good translation for va in English. But this is a description from a Samoan poet, academic, and writer, Albert Wentz, about how he understands the space between. And he says, Va is the space between, the betweenness, not empty space, not space that separates, but space that relates, that holds separate entities and things together in the unity that is all, the space that is context, giving meaning to all things. So from this perspective, what Albert Wentz is trying to say is the space between is something in itself, and it's actually full. And what it's full of is relationship. That between me and this laptop is not an empty space, but it holds my relationship to technology. It holds my relationship to education, my relationship to law and politics and health and media. And I'm embedded in these contexts that are informing how I am showing up and what it is possible to communicate and what it is not. And a simple shift in perception in the relationships. If this wasn't a conference call, but a Zoom call with a friend, would hold a whole different set of possibilities. So do we see that we're swimming in this invisible ocean of relationship? Do we notice? Do we place our understanding of things within our understanding of their interrelationships? I'm going to leave you with this before I give it off to Robert. I was gifted a beautiful proverb from a Lakota elder named Dr. Martin Brokenleg. And Dr. Martin Brokenleg is many things. He's a child psychologist, he's an academic, he specializes in trauma and resilience, but he's also an elder and leader in the Lakota community. And for those that don't know, Lakota people are located in Turtle Island, but is now America, and roughly the region which is now South Dakota. And he said in their culture, they have this saying that we all drag a cultural tale 1,000 years long. Now, that proverb is grounded in Lakota worldview, how they see and understand the world. And Dr. Martin Brokenleg was saying that for Lakota people, when they go to act, they're instructed to think 7 generations back and 7 generations forward. And if you sit down and think about an average human life and you do the math on 15 generations, that's about 1,000 years. And what he's saying is that we're embedded within a tale, T-A-L-E, that stretches, a story, a web of relationship that we all drag with us. And what we're doing needs to pay attention to that. And story is our very human capacity for understanding complexity, for mapping our understanding of relationships. And as our stories and perceptions layer on top of each other, we can see what overlaps and what doesn't, what is said and what's not said. The multiple descriptions are windows revealing the interrelationships that we're embedded in, the patterns that connect between the contexts. And in that way, story starts to become an interface for the transcontextual, a way of expressing perceptions across contexts. So we're going to invite you to increase your sensitivity and perception, to pay attention to the space between, to the ways in which multiple contexts are coming together to form the complex systems that we're navigating. So look at the warm veil. So first we're going to share a story, and then I'm going to guide you through a process of generating and sensing transcontextual information together and see where that takes us. So Robert's going to lead us by telling us a little bit of a story before we begin.
Thank you, Kesh, very much. And if we are dragging stories that are 1,000 years long, that makes me think about this lyric that says, "My life is a plot twisted in directions that I can't see." The book I'm currently reading by my favorite writer begins with one line in a free page that says simply in italics, "For those that made the way." And there's another song by Bob Marley called Rebel Music that starts with this line, "Oh, why can't we roam this open country?" I never used to walk so much around my home village where I currently live, but it was only until 3 years ago that I started walking around and I was like, oh my God, it's so surprising the number of things that I don't get to see when I just stay in what's called my home, or my little compound, in our little homestead. So every time I left the house to go for half an hour or an hour's walk, I would just be intrigued by just how the landscape looked and how unfamiliar the landscape seemed when I just stayed at home. And there are these two almost parallel paths that I've walked too in different travels. And one day, a few weeks ago, I was walking with a friend and we found a shortcut that connects the two. And it was a very tiny and narrow path. And it had lots of thickets on either side. And I was like, I wonder who was the first person who walked this path. And then I could imagine the kids going to and coming from school, people going to and leaving the farm, people going to and leaving for work, and how through that the path becomes visible and it actually becomes a thing that people can follow whether or not you know its story. And something happened a few years ago. Actually, it happened on a Sunday morning when I was waking up and actually preparing to go for Warm Data Call. A few weeks before that, my mother had gone on a trip to the town where I grew up. And it's an agricultural town, so there's lots of lovely things there. But she came back with some grafted orange trees, and she was really excited about the prospect of planting them and tending them and the possibility of them bearing fruit. She has 4 grandchildren, and she very much delights in taking care of them and feeding them and giving them treats. So she brought them back, and they were planted. And in honesty, we didn't know much about tending grafted fruit trees, but we tried our best, and they took some time, a little bit more than they would have if we would have taken best care. But eventually they bore fruit. And then when they bore fruit, it was now waiting for the fateful day when they would be ripe enough to be plucked, harvested, and kept to become ready to eat and shed. And so on this Sunday morning, I woke up when hearing my mother speaking a little bit loudly than she typically would, exclaiming something. So I went outside to see what was going on, and somebody had harvested all of the oranges. And she was angry, and she was sad, and she was disappointed, and she expressed that in all sorts of ways. But one of the things that she said in almost near defeat was that, one day I'm gonna fence this house. And this, of course, comes at a tail end of, this has happened with our kale, our spring onions, our bananas. And with the bananas, it's not just a human situation. We have our neighborly monkey friends who are nowadays making a comical nuisance at making it difficult to harvest things because they will harvest it for you. But this was just dealing with that frustration, and that line that one day I will fence this house stayed with me, and I keep reflecting on that line. Because 30 years ago, when my father first built this house, fences were porous. And porous fences made for subtle coincidences of kids playing in different places, people moving about and having all sorts of shortcuts to move about, all sorts of friendships that lived through these little travel lines, and all sorts of connections that were sustained through, you might call it, a more freer movement through open country. But then from the early 2000s onwards, we've seen lots of homesteads which typically have around 3 or 4 households with brothers living and sisters living with each other, are now fenced. And so for me, I grapple with this question of what has been lost with the continuous building of fences, and I wonder which friendships are being broken and what is happening to the practice of being a neighbor and what is happening with connections between the children what is happening to the practice of sharing that has been affected by the building of these fences. And it seems like these things are happening, but they're so subtle that we don't know what's happened exactly. And when I think about what has been lost, I am reminded of this song by Joni Mitchell called A Little Green, where she speaks of the absence of a lover. And there's this line she says, "But when he is gone, I live with these lonesome blues. And suddenly my bed is too big and my frying pan is too wide. A bed that has been shared can feel too big when you're alone. And a frying pan that has been used to cook for another or others can feel too big when it's just for you now." And so as I continue to hold this question of what has been lost or what possibility is no longer there as these fences go up, I tend to wonder. And so I would like to share in this question with you as we go into the breakouts of what is being revealed. What is being revealed? And I will pass it on to Kesh to share in how we shall go into the breakouts.
So I've added into the chat the question for today's session, what is being revealed? And in a moment, I'm going to open up breakout rooms. And in your breakout rooms, you'll be with a couple of other participants. And in the title of your breakout room will actually be a set of contexts, right? 3. So for example, culture, education, and health. And all we're asking you to do is to think about this question, what is being revealed, through the lenses of these 3 contexts that you'll be given, culture, education, and health. You'll be in there for a little bit of time, and then I'll bring you back, and then we'll put you into another breakout room with other participants. And we'll do that a couple of times, and then we'll come back and we'll see what you're noticing, what's emerging from your conversations. Okay? So we'll open up the breakout rooms for your first set of conversations. What is being revealed?
As we often joke in the warm data world, when we just come out of breakouts, I hope you haven't left your feet or your glasses or your hands there. And I hope that the whole of you has been teleported back to the main room. And in light of our coming together, and in light of our beginning and the story, the question, and what's alive for you and continuing for you at the moment, and the conversations that we've had, what are you noticing? So this is the piece where we will just hear from you. You can go ahead and unmute or raise your hand, and we'll just feel free to speak. And I see that Dr. Helen has already raised, so just go on.
Thank you, Robert. We had fascinating conversations in terms of the warm data. A couple of us heard what we wanted to hear, as distinct from what you really said in telling the story. I got triggered by the idea that your mother needed to sell the house, when in actual fact, I think what you actually said was she wanted to put a fence around the house. But because selling the house was worrying me, I heard what I wanted to hear. And I think that in itself is a fascinating example of how the warm data is alive and constantly present, and that we only think we know what the group said to us, and that the individual only thinks they know what they heard you say, which opens up a whole world of possibilities. So thank you.
The broken telephone game, I think.
This is Elena from the United States, New York. I was with Helen the first time, and that was fascinating that we, created our own story and our own interpretation. I had said, well, I want to have the right answer. So, it's like, okay, what do we do? What do we do? And so the first breakout, I knew the people, but there was a level of intimacy that got deeper. And it's just whatever the three words are, sometimes I have passion about those words or I don't. But listening to other people evokes in me my own story and my own interpretation. I really enjoyed this time being together with folks I knew and folks I didn't know. So that's it.
I'm intrigued to see almost everyone has their camera on after this exercise. It's very interesting. It's often very hard to get to that place. So thank you.
Michael.
Thank you. A couple of things that I noticed and continue to notice as part of this experience. One is the pace. There's just an ease and a slowness and a relaxed feeling that's part of this interaction and has been part of the experience from the time you started, Kesh, with us. The other thing is that in my two groups, we seemed to be more interested in telling stories to each other than answering a particular question. And that was meaningful for me. The other thing I'll say, given that we're in an international setting, I happened to be in two breakout groups where everyone looked like me, which was a very interesting random event.
Same happened to me.
An interesting random event that happened to us in the second breakout room was it was 3 warm data hosts in one breakout room, and we wondered, how did this happen? Is Kesh playing tricks on us?
Well, it didn't happen to me, but I was in my first group with 2 other people who look like me, and I hope I've got 2 new best friends.
What I really enjoy about the activity was that it became very real. So I think, Robert, when you were sharing your story, things became so vivid for me. I was imagining in my mind what you were describing: the house, the fence, the bananas, the monkeys, the kale. And when we went into our breakout groups, I find myself more willing to share personal details about myself, stories, rather than trying to intellectualize the topics. So I don't want to talk about theories. I just want to share my own reflections, my memories, my narratives. Yeah. Thank you.
Robert, I really enjoyed talking to people in the last 2 breakouts. And what reminded me of in your story was the my own home where I grew up, and how the backyard, the house, and how we related, how we lived in that house with my siblings, my parents, and other people in the village. And that I grew up in a house which had no electricity till I was 16 when I left the house. And yet there was no problem, there was no difficulty. I never missed electricity. It is only now that I miss electricity. Then it goes for 5 minutes, you know. And also, I was struck by the story that Kesh said about the path, how many people have walked that path, how a child walks that path and creates a history, and the path itself becomes a history. It was so beautiful to hear.
Mine is also similar to Kiro. I went back to my childhood and living with my siblings, 3 brothers and 2 sisters, pillow fighting, enjoying drinking water right from the tap itself. living, never heard of AHCE and all that, all facilities. And now that story is different. I have everything, but my brothers are separate. I am separate. My younger son is separate, living about 30, 40 kilometers away from me. I'm living differently with my elder son. So those good old days, it revealed me, the life spent, which I started missing. And the second group, I discovered one of my own person from India, Mumbai. She and me were there. The third lady was from Singapore. She excused herself for some time. But both of us, the Indians, we discovered each other. Even though I'm from Gurgaon, Delhi, and she is from Mumbai, there are many things which are common. The way Kesh presented, the data and the meaning of data and all that, we had some discussion on that. So I think it was very, very revealing in the sense that what appears to me only digits actually is more than that. It's a relationship, and that reminded me of binary principles. Zero and one. Computing is nothing but zero and one. Today I have already forgotten about it. It's much, much, much more. And the beauty of this data, whatever you call it, is that today we are connected with so many people from different time zones and different parts of the world. So that was quite revealing.
In the book Steps to an Ecology of Mind by Gregory Bateson, one of my favorite quotes is a simple one, where he says, story is the responsiveness to patterns which connect. And by you sharing a story is an attempt at you, rather than compartmentalizing things into colors and shapes, you're attempting to make a portrait, something, to put something together and to share it. So we are, as somebody said in the chat there, that we are creating and tending to our warm data, the one that's alive and real around us.
I fully agree with you. And also, I like to add that in that portrait, putting life into that portrait, as if the portrait is talking to me and I'm talking to the portrait. It's not only digits and drawings and all that. There is a life into it, there is a relationship into it.
My hand is up. I'm Rihanna in the US, and I'd like to ask you a question, Robert. You and Kesh both. How did the two of you connect around this? What is the story there? What's in the space between you?
A lot of memes, I think, is in the space between myself and Robert.
A lot of what? I'm sorry.
Memes. Robert really likes to send memes. I think all of our stories on how we found our way to warm data are long and complex ones. It's not just that and nothing more. And any story that I give you is going to be a severely reduced version. For myself, I was doing a master's and my field was well-being science. And I was working with the University of Melbourne in a research team thinking about how do you bring systems thinking into well-being. And instead of creating well individuals, which our field of psychology was kind of focused on, well, how do you create systems that just encourage well-being and starting to see well-being as an emergent property? And at that point in time, my thinking in system science was very much along the lines of things like systems dynamics and complex adaptive systems. But I felt like I was hitting myself against the wall. And I had just handed in my PhD application, and a friend of mine in that research team said that she was going to go to a training in about 3 weeks. And I wasn't doing anything else, twiddling my thumbs. I was like, I'll come along. It sounds interesting. I had no idea what it was. And that's where I met Nora. And that's where I did my training in warm data back in 2019. And Nora was pointing out the things that I pointed out to you today. And what I kind of saw was in a lot of the ways that we think about complexity, we're using the same thinking, but not recognizing it. And so, we're mapping systems, we're drawing these circles and we're connecting them with lines and we're saying this thing is related to this thing and there's but when you walk through a forest, where are the lines and where are the dots? And it's very clear that living systems don't think in this way and they don't act in this way. And no extension or number of variables was ever going to capture the full complexity of a forest or a meadow or a family. That's where I dived into warm data. And along the way, I met Robert.
Yeah, and I guess the story between me and Kesh is one of bromance, I guess, where we are both thorns in each other's side, but we try to be there for each other as often as we can, and there's a lot of affection shared there. So that's why we always love to do things together. We still have about 10 or so minutes before we move on to the closing. So the question is still, what are you noticing? And I see that people who raise their hands, so please do go on.
Well, first of all, thank you so much. I'm speaking from Brazil. And first thing, I'm very impacted by what is going on here. This VA thing. And I had 2 breakout rooms that were really diverse and wonderful. 2 people from India in the first one, 2 people from North America in the second one. It was amazing how we were trying to first understand the task. We were like, should we find out what we need to talk about culture, and in the first one education, and then suddenly we start to talk about our lives and our story, and we were really interested in get to know each other. In the second one, there was a list of things and we were like, what is that? But the feeling was we didn't want to go into the frame, to go into the task itself. There was much more among all of us to do, to tell, and to really get connected. And the feeling I would like to share is really this wide thing, being all of us from so many different places, so many diverse stories. We don't have fences here. The space between all of us is a lot of energy. I really can feel this energy. In the first exercise, like the space between the screen and myself, I was going through this air, molecules, atoms, and all those things. And then suddenly moving to the breakout home, coming back, being here, all cameras on, looking to the eyes, the movements. It's like there is really a lot in this va, and I'm really impacted. I just wanted to share with all of you the feeling that there is no fence here. Thank you so much for that, Robert and Kesh.
Elena, you finished?
Yes.
I loved your question, Rihanna, to Robert and Kesh. And I loved the answer that you got. But I wanted to comment on the fact that I didn't need to hear the answer because I felt the bromance from the beginning. From the moment you started speaking, I knew these are 2 men who know each other, who have a lot of warmth for each other, and that we talk about Zoom as being some kind of cold clinical space, and we'd love to be in the same room as each other. But that is not always how I experience Zoom. And I think that knowing the difference between 2 people who have a strong connection and 2 people who are just there to read their script is palpable for me this morning. So I really value the fact that you have such a relationship because you're emanating that into this Zoom room. And the warmth and the love and the connectedness that I think we're feeling has as much to do with the energy that you're emanating as it does for the questions you posed us. So, thank you.
I noticed I was in two breakout rooms, and the first one was with two people that I knew well, and there were no barriers, no fences, and so on. And we just got into telling stories and connecting, and a lot of stuff really creatively emerged from that, about our process and about the substance of what kind of came up. Everything was emerging rather than like we all had a predetermined thing that we needed to say. It wasn't that at all. It was just what emerged in the moment. In the second group, I was with three people who I did not know, who were new to me. And right away, we got into what the topic was, the politics and so on. And I couldn't relate to it. I didn't know, I really thought there was a different atmosphere. And so I just really felt out of whack, out of place. And it wasn't until all three shared a bit where their home was or what their country was or their connection. Then all of a sudden I'm from the United States. And how do I even talk about that? I found that difficult because I was so aware of the polarizations and conflicts which we have in this country right now with election year and so on. But at the end of that, I was reminded, well, I guess we're not alone. That is also happening elsewhere in the world. But it took a while to really connect to the group.
Yes, good morning. I'm struck by the feeling that I have to want more here. Like the two breakout rooms that I was in were just really so compelling, so stimulating, mentally, psychologically, emotionally, in terms of the sharing. But I noticed for me, internally, I kept wanting to try to see a pattern, like make some sense of what we were experiencing. I feel like I'm kind of steeped in Western culture in terms of trying to make something of what was being shared and what I was sharing. I think I didn't really fully appreciate the actual connection, talking about the connection, not feeling the connection. That was obviously there. There was a connection. I think we each in both work breakouts came into the space, at least in the breakouts that I was in. We each came into the space feeling a sense of like, I belong here. I'm among peers. We're participating. No, this is what I know. I know I'm left with wanting more. Like I want more of this. So I don't know what that means, but that's how I'm left here.
I once bought this book for less than $1 on the street. And it's called Songlines by Bruce Chatwin. And I lost it at my friend's house. And then he said, "Oh, I found your book." 2 years later, and it wasn't the right size. So what he actually found was that their family had a copy too. And so the one copy that I have before I lost it again was my friend's book. But in that book, there is a story about the Tuaregs in West Africa, who are a nomadic people who travel the desert. And when you're traveling, you don't have the luxury of carrying so much stuff. So they say that the Tuareg women wear their wealth. So they would be adorned with gold necklaces and all of those things, that it wouldn't be wealth in the form of all sorts of things, but what it was in the body.
And from there, that would be the means by which sustenance continued. But the thing about that piece is what happens when you are traveling and you meet somebody you do not know. And there is this thing that anything could happen. You could meet a friend and you could not meet a friend. And in this book, this person was describing how the Tuaregs would pitch tent and would get a coffee going. And the gesture would be to meet with this small hospitality, this person that they do not know. And of course, probably the sword still had to be at hand somewhere concealed. But the gesture was holding the potentiality that this will hopefully be a peaceful encounter, and that we shall share this peace, and we shall be on our ways. And so for me, I just imagine this piece all feeling like we want more and that we shared, and all of these things was in a minute practice of this gesture of hospitality. And I'm really grateful to have shared and then been in sharing with you today. And it is with that that I shall pass it back to Kesh to close us today.
So today I want to close our session with a poem from Nora's new book, Combining, actually. And this poem is called Harvest. Be careful. A hasty harvest is an unfeeding. It is non-food. Harvests are patient history and quiet roots that start tiny. While compost is necessary for the growing season, do not eat the compost. Wait. The eggshells and onion skins bear little resemblance to the conversation at the table where the meal they fed feeds you. Wait. The industrial craving for instant food, ideas, and plans distract from entering ecological time. An apple seed in the ground is not an apple. It requires seasons, years, changes in light, wind, temperature. It must reach up into the spring sun and down into the winter earth. The blossoms need the insects and the songs of the baby birds. This is not the time to harvest. This is the time to let these ideas come to find other contexts in the underground, in the wilderness. Notice the unecology of the question, what is the point? A meadow never asks such a thing. Life is making life, nothing less. The harvest is a time of golden brown reds and deep orange tones. The harvest is marking the long journey into the squishy death and rot that offers new compost. It is the last moon before the cold comes. Do not race into winter before it's due. Harvest is long in its arrival. Sometimes it comes with an empty basket, leaving its lost leaves and roots to decompose, feeding the possibility of next year. Likewise, let the ideas and stories of today remain in the undergrowth. Let them find new context, new contacts, and new life. Let the movement of relating follow its own reachings. Let it touch and rename itself as it moves. This is the beginning. This is the middle. Let it form and inform. Do not ask what you will get out of this. This is the making of next year's rain. The point is the meadow of 100 years from now. Ecology is not instant. You can't run to the shop and buy it. There is no summation, nothing to put in your pocket. only idea seeds in warmth and moist history. Relax. The possibilities are brewing, stewing. Let them wander and shape in ways you may have never considered. Thank you all so much for having us. I've put a chapter of Nora's book in the chat for you if you want to continue exploring a little bit. But I'm pretty sure we're going to go to a break now.
Thank you, Kesh. Thank you, Robert, for this wonderful session.